Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of my drumming vlog. Today I want to talk about the new Axis E3 trigger system. Alright, before we start talking about the specifics of the Axis E3 triggers, I would like to briefly compare three different trigger systems which have been released last year. I'm talking about the pedal trigger system, the ontrigger system and the Axis E3 triggers. First of all three systems work fine. When I've ordered triggers from Pedal Trigger, I was kind of disappointed because the production and shipping took almost 3 months, although I got an email from Pedal Trigger after I purchased their triggers that I would receive them within just 2 weeks. So everyone who goes for the Pedal Trigger, be aware that you might have to wait a couple of months until you get them. Other than that, the trigger worked just fine. Second was the ontrigger trigger system. You can place this one right underneath your footboard. Great company, great customer service, and the trigger works fine as well. I would say that the ontrigger system is a bit more sensitive than the pedal trigger system, and I really like that it's placed underneath the footboard. This way it doesn't influence the way your pedal feels. And number 3, the Axis E3 trigger system. Of all 3 trigger systems I just mentioned, I have to tell you that the Axis E3 trigger works best in my opinion. Maybe I have to also add that I'm not endorsed by Axis, so this is just my personal preference. The trigger works fine at slow and medium tempos, like in this example. And it works great when playing faster stuff. There's also another review video on YouTube from a drummer who uses the heel toe technique, so it works fine for doubles as well. Now that's it for the positive aspects. There are still 3 things I would like to point out that you have to keep in mind before you purchase these Axis triggers. Number 1, the structure underneath your pedal board. Let me show you what I mean by that. I'm using the old-timer Iron Cobra Junior pedals. The pedals work just fine, but at first it was a bit tricky to place the E3 trigger in the exact spot in the middle of the foot plate. If it's not placed perfectly in the middle, the structure of this footboard will touch the Axis trigger and result in forced triggering. This is especially important if you're using the swivel technique with this kind of pedals. Since the lateral motion of the swivel technique tends to move your footboard from side to side a bit when you're using a chain rim pedal, this could be a major problem and result in a lot of mistriggering. With a flat surface underneath your footboard, you won't have this problem at all. Number 2, low footboard. Some drummers like to set up their pedals in a way that their footboard angle is really low when the beater hits the bass drum head. Due to the size of the trigger, this is not going to work out with the E3 trigger box. I keep my footboard at a standard angle and never had this problem. Although it's important to mention that every drummer who wants to purchase the E3 trigger has to keep in mind that an extremely low footboard is not going to work out with this trigger. And number 3, double triggering in the stopping position. By that I mean the following. If you're using a low to medium string tension like I do, and you press the bass drum beater against the bass drum head every time you start and stop a bass drum pattern, you have to be extra careful to really bury the beater. Since the Axis E3 trigger is really sensitive, it's possible that you get a misfire of the trigger every time you bury the beater into a bass drum head. What I did to eliminate this problem is the following. Since the trigger is only misfiring if I don't bury the beater perfectly, I started to incorporate my quads for the last stroke of the bass drum pattern. By that I mean that all regular bass drum hits are generated from my calf muscles, but when I want to stop a bass drum pattern, I apply extra pressure from my quads to bury the beater. Here's how this looks like. Alright, that's it for this video. If you have any further questions regarding the Axis E3 bass drum trigger, then just comment below. Cheers from Vienna, bye.